All right, let's go ahead and call the Senate to order. Sergeant Arms will please secure the chamber doors. Members, please take your seats. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. President.
All right, Senators, this morning we are very, very pleased to have Reverend Dr. Robert Turner from the Empowerment Temple AME Church, guest of the distinguished senator from the 40th District. Please rise for the invocation.
Dear Lord, our Heavenly Father and gracious Creator, create in all of us a clean heart and renew a right spirit within us. Lord, touch our minds that we might know your will. Touch our hearts that we may be compassionate to your children. And guide our hands and our feet so that we may be your vessels, giving truth, relief, justice, mercy, love, and hope to all Marylanders. We commit ourselves to you. We beg of your forgiveness for any and all wrong done. And we thank you for your grace you've extended to the great state of Maryland and all the counties, cities, and communities represented here today. In your holy, precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, sir. Much appreciated. Thank you. Chair recognizes Senator from the 40th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. Reverend Dr. Richard Allen Turner is a millennial who is passionate about his calling to serve this present age by speaking truth to power and by following the word as printed in Isaiah 61 to preach good tidings to the poor, heal the heartbroken, proclaim liberty to the captives, and opening of the prison to those who are bound. Dr. Turner came to the Empowerment Temple AME Church in Baltimore, Maryland, where he began serving on September 26, 2021. Mr. President, many of our colleagues got a chance to meet Reverend Turner last week. He accompanied to 2 committee hearings, and I shared with him his activism since coming to Baltimore. Even prior to coming to Baltimore, he served in Oklahoma. And, you know, on a weekly basis, he will walk down to City Hall. Since coming here to Baltimore every month for the last 6 months, he walks from Baltimore to the White House in the name of reparations. And just last week, he walked 54 miles from in Alabama, from Selma to Montgomery, the same day that the president was there. He is a true leader who, you know, embodies all that he preaches. And Mr. President, I ask that we journalize the prayer today and welcome Dr. Turner to the Senate.
Well, thank you, Senator, and without objection, most certainly, we will journalize that wonderful invocation this morning, and thank you for your work and leadership. We appreciate it, genuinely. Thank you. All right, has everyone recorded their presence? It appears so. The clerk will take the call. With 44 members in the chamber and a quorum being present, the Senate of Maryland is now in session. We have resolutions. We've got a number of resolutions. Let's start there with the senator from the 40th. We have some guests who are going to be joining us. Welcome, welcome.
Mr. President, as our guests come in, I forgot to mention the one most crucial thing to the Kappa caucus here in the Senate. Dr. Reverend Turner is also a member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated.
Very good.
Best fraternity ever.
No. All right. Get a championship team here. All right. Chair recognizes the senator from the 40th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. This team is also joined by a good Kappa man, the president of Coppin State University. But today we're joined by Coppin State's baseball team, who scored 8 runs in the 9th inning to win the 2022 MEAC championship with an 18-12 victory over Delaware State on May the 21st, 2022 in Norfolk, Virginia. This was the Eagles' first MEAC championship since 1995 and allowed Coppin to advance to the first ever NCAA regional on June the 3rd to the 4th in 2022 in Greenville, North Carolina, on the campus of East Carolina University. Joined with them today is the president of Coppin State University, Dr. Anthony Jenkins, head coach Herman Reed Sr., associate head coach Sean Repay, assistant coach Colin Dower, baseball operations Lyndon Watkins, vice president of student affairs Stefan Moore, the provost Dr. Pamela Wilkes, athletic director Derek Carter, vice president of finance Steve Danick, and the director of governor affairs, who many of us know used to be the executive director for the Legislative Black Caucus, but now serve as head of government affairs for Coppin State University, Ms. Stephanie Hall. Colleagues, please join me in welcoming Coppin State University's champions to the chamber.
We welcome, and the clerk will read the resolution.
Be it hereby known to all that the Senate of Maryland offers its sincerest congratulations to Coppin State University baseball team in recognition of your winning the 2022 MEAC Conference Championship. We applaud your outstanding season and wish you many more. Congratulations. The entire membership extends its best wishes on this memorable occasion and directs this resolution to be presented on this 14th day of March 2023.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? If so, the clerk will take the call. To the gentlemen of the Coppin State University baseball team, congratulations on winning the 2022 MEAC Conference Championship. We are incredibly thrilled for your success and look forward to the success that you will have in the years to come. Congratulations. Well, I haven't seen President Jenkins swing a baseball bat. I have seen him swing a golf club, and so he certainly knows how to hit a ball one way. Fair enough. Fair enough. Good to see you. Good to see you. All right. Thank you all. We're honored by your presence. Thank you all. Thank you for your work.
Mr. President,
Yes.
I have a group up in the gallery, and they have to leave at 10:30.
Sir, may I proceed?
Thank you. And I just want to say they're with Gary McCann and with Spike Colleging, Planning and Business Networking, and Doug Butsky, Level 10 Events, and they're right up there. And
Wonderful. Welcome.
I see their
Welcome.
hands up, so thank you.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for coming, and
Thank you
enjoy
all for
your
being
day.
here. Thank you, Senator. All right, we have Chair County Senator from Montgomery County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a quick announcement.
Please.
Today I have Ali Smith, who's here. He's a junior at Bowie State. He's shadowing me. He's also an intern with the Legislative Black Caucus. If you give him a warm Senate welcome.
Wonderful. Welcome. Welcome. Senator from District 11, do we have the Newtown folks? It appears we do. Let's let them come on in. Our Chair of Finance has joined the Newtown basketball team, giving some, tips, tricks. Oh, there you go. All right. Chair recognizes the Senator from District 11.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Last Thursday, District 11's own Newtown Titans played a phenomenal game against District 25's Largo Lions, sorry, Madam Chair, prevailing by a score of 64-57 and becoming the MPSSA Class 2A state champions. The Titans posted an impressive 22-3 record this year and have a winning reputation with 4 state championships and 4 Baltimore County championships in 2007, 2015, and 2016. We know it takes leadership and teamwork to get to this level and want to acknowledge the contributions and support from their school and families as well. Principal James Martin and the entire administrative team, Titans athletic director, Preston Waters, their outstanding coaching staff led by Derek Wise and Jaylon Mack, and also joined today by coaches Danny Shan, Christopher Rohn, Rayvon Daniels, and Anthony Biggers. Please join me in congratulating Cam Sparrow for his impressive 1,000-point scoring career and also 3.9 GPA. He joins teammate Arrington Greenfield in being selected to the first team All-Baltimore County. Congratulations, Titans.
All right. The clerk will read the resolution.
Be it hereby known to all that the Senate of Maryland offers sincerest congratulations to Newtown boys varsity basketball team in recognition of your winning the MPSSAA Class 2A state championship. We applaud your outstanding season and wish you many more. Congratulations. The entire membership extends its best wishes on this memorable occasion and directs this resolution be presented on this 14th day of March, 2023.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? If so, the clerk will take the call. All right, gentlemen, from the Newtown boys varsity basketball team, the Senate of Maryland unanimously celebrates your success and wishes you much, much, much more success in the years to come. Congratulations. We're thrilled you all could join us today. Keep up the great work on the court and off the court, in the classroom too, as it goes. Student athletes are key. All right, we have one. Chair recognizes Senator from Baltimore County.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would ask for everyone to welcome Ms. Maha Derkovic and Nick Dimitris, who are the Legislative Affairs Coordinators of Baltimore County Student Councils, as well as the Baltimore County Student Councils, which is a student-led organization that supports school administrators, the Board of Education for Baltimore County, as well as the Maryland Association of Students. The council, by providing valuable input and feedback on issues that affect all students, they're a valuable part of Baltimore County. Please join me in welcoming them.
Welcome, welcome. Do we have them in the gallery? Is this? If you all could stand, we will just welcome. Hope you all enjoy your day in Annapolis today. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully, get to see some government in action today. All right. We also have one additional. Chair recognizes the Senator from Montgomery County.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Colleagues, today is this month is Multiple Sclerosis Month. We're joined today by Lynn Murhai, who's been a champion around these issues. So multiple sclerosis, I'm just going to refer to it as MS, affects more than 1 million people in the state of Maryland. It's often unpredictable and attacks the central nervous system, which can often be really disabling. But we want to not only bring awareness, but also work together to find a cure. Mr. President, colleagues, I have 2 bracelets on, one signifying multiple sclerosis, a walking event and a bike riding event. But with that, Mr. President, I have a resolution. If the clerk could please read it in full.
Clerk will read the resolution in full.
Be it hereby known to all that the Senate of Maryland offers its sincerest congratulations to the National MS Society Greater DC Maryland Chapter in recognition of your dedication and support to fight the unpredictable and often debilitating disease, multiple sclerosis, for the citizens of Maryland. The entire membership extends its best wishes on this memorable occasion and directs this resolution be presented on this 14th day of March, 2023.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? If so, the clerk will take the call. The Senate of Maryland unanimously thanks you for your work, and thanks to MS Society for all of its awareness activities. It's so critically important. Thank you all so much. Thank you, thank you. All right. Yes, Chair recognizes the Senator from Montgomery County.
Thank you, Mr. President. Point of personal privilege.
Senator, may proceed.
Many of you here on this floor had the privilege of serving over in the House with Delegate Sheila Hickson. Sheila passed away a few months ago, and I've been working with her daughter trying to find a proper way to honor Sheila for all the years that she was here and the friendship she had with everybody. So we decided, instead of a really somber memorial service for Sheila, that we would do an Irish party at Galway Bay. which we're doing tonight from 5 to 8. We have Sheila's favorite band, the Blarney Bench will be there, and lots of people coming back into town that had served with Sheila, and a lot of good stories will be shared. So I urge you all to not talk too long on your committees today so that everybody can get over to raise a toast to Sheila.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Senator, for that. And we'll looking forward to it. I'm sure the chairwoman is smiling down on what will be a wonderful celebration today. All right. Additional announcements or introductions before we jump into things today. Senator from District 6, do you have guests? I'm not sure if they're here yet.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. President. We have one of our local schools here also in Baltimore County, Patapsco High School. And if they're here, I wish they could stand, and the Senate would give them a good, warm greeting. Thank you.
Wonderful. Welcome. Welcome. Unless they're, I don't know if they're behind me. If not, then maybe not. Then we'll if we get noticed, we'll stop and make sure. All right. Any further business before we jump? Yes, Chair.
If I could, please. Thank you. I'll take the floor. No. Thank you, Mr. President. The 31st of this month, we'll be having our annual legislative prayer breakfast. It's going to be at the Calvert Hall, Calvert House. I'll call it the Calvert Hall, but the Calvert House at 7:30. It is free, but we would like for you to RSVP in my office, and so we can just get the numbers and make sure we can make it accommodating for you. So 31st, 7:30 at the Calvert House. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. All right. Any further business before we jump into the work of the day? If not, let's go ahead and waive the reading of the journal from the prior legislative day. Schedule-wise, it's going to be a busy day. We have a big floor day today, a lot of second readers. We also are going to have a lot of time in committees. So, we'll break where feasible, but expect double sessions tomorrow, Thursday, Friday, and hold Saturday. So it's going to be a busy week, but we'll get through it. All right, let's do a quorum call quickly before we do third readers.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their presence? If so, the clerk will take the call. With 44 members in the chamber and a quorum being present, the Senate of Maryland remains in session. We've got third reading calendar number 25. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 136, Senator Klossmeyer, Unemployment Insurance Recovery Benefits Limitation and Methods.
All right, Senate Bill 136 is on third reading for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 43 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 136 having received a constitutional majority is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 341, Senator Feldman, Public Senior Higher Education Institutions Reproductive Health Services Plans Requirements.
Senate Bill 341 is on third reading for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 32 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 341 having received a constitutional majority is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 379, Senator Kagan, Election Law, Ballot Processing and Reporting Procedures, and 2024 primary date.
Senate Bill 379 is on third reader for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 32 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 379 having received a constitutional majority is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 494, Senator Guile, Maryland State Department of Education Employee Status and Designation.
Senate Bill 494 is on third reading for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 45 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 494 having received a constitutional majority is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 607, Senator Ferguson, Baltimore City Alcoholic Beverages, 46 Alcoholic Beverages District revisions.
Senate Bill 607 is on third reading for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 44 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 607 having received a constitutional majority is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 726, Chair, Finance Committee, State Board of Examiners of Psychologists, sunset extension.
Senate Bill 726 is on third reading for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 46 votes in the affirmative, Bill 726 having received a constitutional majority is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 727, Chair, Finance Committee, State Board of Physical Therapy Examiners, sunset extension.
Senate Bill 727 is on third reading for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 45 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 727, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 728, Chair, Finance Committee, State Board of Examiners and Optometry, sunset extension.
Senate Bill 728 is on third reading for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 46 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 728, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 731, Chair, Finance Committee, State Board of Certification of Residential Child Care Program Professionals, sunset extension.
Senate Bill 731 is on third reading for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 46 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 731, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 798, Senator Ferguson, Declaration of Rights, right to reproductive freedoms. This is a constitutional amendment.
Senate Bill 798 is on third reading for final passage. Senators, this is a constitutional amendment. Chair recognizes the minority whip on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. We had extensive debate on this late last week. Didn't want to let the moment pass without just calling the body's attention to this bill and be sure everyone knows what's at stake here. It's funny, last night we talked about a bill dealing with the Second Amendment, an enumerated and spelled out right in the Constitution that this body generally tries to argue is not in the Constitution, even though it's there. This is about establishing something that has been talked about as a constitutional right, even though it's not listed in the Constitution, but it's considered as was part of an interpretation in a previous court that was later struck down. But this bill is not about whether you believe abortion at some level should be legal or not. There's room for debate about that overall policy. And in our state, we've pretty much settled the debate. We've said that abortion will be legal all the way through pregnancy, with only some exceptions against an abortion and pretty limited at the very end. We essentially have right now in state law no real appreciable limits on an abortion at any stage of pregnancy. And last year we passed a bill to let other health occupations perform abortion procedures, including those very late in the pregnancy. But I think it's important. So number one, that's important. That's in law already. Number two, we offered some amendments to the language of this bill that we thought were actually very constructive and helpful. They were rejected. One in particular talked about making sure safety is in there. We also offered an amendment to try to put the exact language of what people are voting on the ballot, and that was rejected. But when we talk about safety, the response to that was, well, we already have safety regulations in our laws and regulations, so we don't need the bill. Well, we have everything else in law and regulation right now too, but we still need this constitutional amendment according to the proponents of this. And I think it's unfortunate because I think the story in the press will be Maryland Senate votes to put right to reproductive freedom or right to an abortion in the Constitution. But what we're really doing here is we are establishing a legal standard, as was repeatedly mentioned by our floor leader and others. We're establishing a legal standard by which every regulation and law must be held to. But that legal standard is, the standard is that this is as close to an absolute right as you can get, meaning that any regulation for safety, for late term, for a pregnancy, for a pregnant child in a pregnancy all the way to right before birth, any regulation or law that we have ever had on the books will now be able to be taken to court under this if the voters approve this. So it's not about whether or not you think abortion should be legal. That's not in question in Maryland, whatever everybody's position is on it, whatever my position is on abortion or when life begins. This is setting a legal standard by which every single safety regulation of a medical facility is now going to be on the chopping block in Maryland, and it will have to go to court. Because the standard will be the Constitution has made this a fundamental and near absolute right. Let me just talk about one more. So I think it's important before we vote on that. I think that's very dangerous. I think we should not make it to the point where you can never have a regulation on anything dealing with safety, health, or the mother. And number two, a lot of times when we talk about the right to life, abortion, choice, there's a lot of faith that gets mixed into that. People talking about their faith in God and what they believe about God and what they believe about when life begins. Well, I have very strong faith that I lean on when I make decisions. But I also have science. And science shows us very clearly that there is a point when you cannot question that that is a life. We may argue about exactly when that is, but there is a point where there's no argument. There's at least a point at viability. And I would argue that with what we can see from science and technology, there's a point before that. But there is a point at viability for sure. But what this amendment is doing is saying an unborn child at any stage of pregnancy in our Constitution has no rights. Unless somehow you can convince a court that some regulation or some safety measure can still hold up. So, Mr. President, I have to vote no because I cannot approve that, and I would urge the body to vote no. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the Senator from the 38th District on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be brief, and Friday was a hard day when we discussed this on the floor, and I just wanted to share with my colleagues that when we put the right to abortion in the Maryland Constitution and make it virtually impossible for any kind of safeguards, we should be talking about how we do want to prevent our young women. And I would just ask my colleagues to think about, as you move forward, putting the right to reproductive freedom in the Maryland Constitution, and the fact that we passed legislation last year that expanded abortion for non-physicians to provide abortion and put taxpayer dollars towards that training and those services, that it's even more reason just to put some policies in place to protect our young women. So moving forward, I'm hoping to work with you on some of those policies. I appreciate your consideration and hearing me out, but that's why I will be voting no on SB 798.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the Senator from District 6 on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a hard issue, and I just think about the words that are in this bill. And I think about the words that are not in this bill also. Life is not in it. Fetus is not in it. And if you go back in time and you talk about life, if you look in it biblically, it said life of the flesh is in the blood. If they would have read the Old Testament back in George Washington's day, they could have saved his life because they continued to take blood out of him. And they eventually killed him because they thought that the blood was evil in that day. And read it. It's exactly what happened. But I think about life and how precious it is. Life is precious. And there's only one that gives life. And we're saying today that we're going to take life away in this constitutional amendment. I hope we search our hearts and we really realize how important this vote is and how important it is for life. I take it to my heart and I take it seriously, and I believe every person in this room takes it seriously too. I think the things that we do in our heart, we truly believe we are doing the right thing. But I really think we need to search our heart in this one and really realize This is a moment in time. We're going to make a very important decision. So all I can say is this. Please search your heart. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Further discussion? If not, Senate Bill 798 is on third reader for final passage. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 32 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 798, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. All right, let's go to layover calendar number 15.
Mr. President,
Oh, yes, Chair
before we
recognizes.
go to the new calendar, I'm really sorry. I didn't get my button on Senate Bill 379.
Oh, 379 from
Green.
in green. 379. Any objections? Without objection, so ordered. Senator from District 4.
Thank you, Mr. President. On Senate Bill 341, I'd like to be recorded in the red, please.
341.
Yes, sir.
Green to red. Any objections? Without objection, so ordered. Senator from Prince George's.
Thank you, Mr. President. My button didn't work on Senate Bill 727. I'd like to be recorded in the green.
727 in the green.
Yep.
Any objections? Without objection, so ordered. Any others? All right. Let's go to the layover calendar, number 15. Clerk will read the bill.
Senate Bill 686, Senator Smith, Civil Actions, Child Sexual Abuse, Definition, Damages, and Statute of Limitations, the Child Victims Act of 2023. Question is on the adoption of the 8 committee amendments and the favorable report.
All right. Question is on the 8 committee amendments. On the amendments, Chair recognizes the senator from the 42nd District.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have ordered an amendment on this bill, but it hasn't arrived yet. Could I ask that the bill be special ordered until the end of this morning's calendar, so we'll take it up last instead of early?
Any senators move to special order the bill to the end of the calendar? Any objections? Without objection, so ordered. We'll take it up at the end of the day today. All right, let's go to the Committee on Finance. We've got a lot of second readers today, so we'll start with Finance. We may bounce around to give committees a break a bit, but let's start in Finance. This is report number 14. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 213, Senator Ellis, Health Occupations Clinical Nurse Specialist, prescribing, favorable with one amendment.
Chair recognizes the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. As most of you colleagues know, my late mom was a nurse. She went to college the same time I was in college and got her RN, and she rose up through the ranks to run a clinic, and she became a registered nurse, advanced practice nurse. And one of the things that she wasn't able to do is do prescriptions. In Maryland, fast forward a few years later in Maryland, certified nurses who are clinical nurse specialists don't have that prescriptive authority. So this bill, Senate Bill 213, gives prescriptive authority to clinical nurse specialists. The bill is amended to include individuals who also have a multi-state license under the Compact for Nurses. There is no fiscal impact on this bill, and I move for adoption of the favorable committee report and the amendment.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now is on the favorable report as amended. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 213 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 375, Senator Ellis, State Board of Physicians, inactive and emeritus status, favorable with two amendments.
Chair recognizes the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 375 corrects a little problem when physicians retire. They do not continue to have continuing professional education. Therefore, they cannot use the title of doctor, DR, physician. This bill corrects that. This bill will provide a emeritus status for physicians. They request the status, and they go into the inactive status as emeritus. Licensee on emeritus status may use the word doctor, DR, physician, DO, or MD under this bill. Therefore, I move the bill, Senate Bill 375.
Any amendments? And the amendments?
And the amendments.
Okay, excellent. Yes. All right. The floor leader moves for the adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objection to the two committee amendments? Without objection, the two committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the favorable report as amended. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 375 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 448, Senator Guile, alcoholic beverages, manufacturing licenses, and off-site permits, favorable to amendments.
Chair recognizes the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 448 extends the termination dates for provisions of Chapters 359 and 360 of 2021 and Chapters 477 and 478 of 2022 that authorize the sale and delivery of liquor and beer by licensed in-state distillers and brewers from June 30th, 2023 to June 30th, 2025. The bill also delays the date from July 1st, 2023 to July 1st, 2025 that specified licensed breweries are authorized to sell up to 288 ounces of beer to a person at an off-site permitted event. Amendment 1 is technical. Amendment 2 limits the amount of liquor or beer that may be directly shipped by a licensed distiller or brewery to a consumer in the state during a calendar year. I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objection to the two committee amendments? Without objection, the two committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the favorable report as amended. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 448 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 449, Senator Guile, health occupations practice audiology definition, favorable for amendments.
Chair recognizes the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 449 clarifies the definition of practice audiology by specifying that practice audiology includes the prescribing, ordering, selling, dispensing, or fitting of a hearing aid to an individual for the correction or relief of a condition for which such devices are worn. Amendment 1 adds a sponsor and makes technical changes. Amendment 2 strikes references to osseointegrated devices. Amendment 3 clarifies that the definition of hearing and dispensing includes ordering prescription hearing aids. Amendment 4 clarifies that specific or specified provisions of state law that conflict with federal law and regulations do not apply to over-the-counter hearing aids and alters the bill's effective date. There is no fiscal impact. I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the four committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objection to the four committee amendments? Without objection, the four committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 449 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 550, the President Financial Regulation Maryland Community Investment Venture Fund Establishment Access to Banking Act, favorable to amendments.
Chair recognizes the chair of the committee as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, Senate Bill 550 is an administration bill that basically does two things. One, it provides incentives for banking or depository institutions to establish or expand their presence in low to moderate income communities. And the second thing it does is it creates a community venture fund to encourage investment in technologies that would increase access to capital or eligibility to capital for businesses in low to moderate income communities. This bill was adopted by the committee with two amendments. Amendment number 1 adds sponsors. Amendment number 2 strikes a provision that was in the bill as introduced that would exempt certain services from state procurement law and makes a technical correction. Mr. President, I move the adoption of the amendments and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objection to the two committee amendments? Without objection, the two committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 550 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 560, Senator Gazzone, Animal Testing and Research, Human Relevant Research Funding and Animal Testing and Research Licensure. Favorable to amendments.
Chair recognizes the senator from Montgomery County as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. We are in the 21st century, and medical science and technology is doing phenomenal things, creating new ways to discover ways to help cure human beings of disease. The bill before us, as amended, is a major step in putting a little extra funding into pushing for even greater discoveries for ways in which we can treat human health care. This bill provides that we are creating a fund within TEDCO, and that's the Maryland Technology Development Corporation, and the fund will receive contributions from those research facilities in the state that currently use animals for research that fall under the Animal Welfare Act. They will contribute into the fund based on the number of animals that they are experimenting on, and that fund will then be utilized to provide grants to those technology companies, for instance, those utilizing computer modeling, or those that are using cells on a computer chip to actually predict outcomes for human relevant research and start moving us away from using animals for experimentation, which is pretty much 19th and 20th century technology. So we will be making huge gains here in moving away from animal testing and into human relevant testing that will in fact provide accurate results as to outcomes for humans. Amendment 1 alters the title and is technical. Amendment 2 strikes the role of a separate institutional review board regarding the administration of the fund. It strikes a licensing requirement for affected research facilities and instead requires these facilities to contribute to the fund and authorizes a civil penalty for noncompliance with the bill's requirements. Mr. President, I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objection to the two committee amendments? Without objection, the two committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 560 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 838, Senator Kramer, Workplace Fraud and Prevailing Wage Violations, Penalties and Referrals. Favorable to amendments.
Chair recognizes the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, workplace misclassification and wage fraud is a significant problem, not just for the employee who is having their wages misclassified or not receiving benefits they should, but it has a significant impact on our state economy. It adversely affects unemployment insurance. It adversely affects workers' compensation insurance, and it provides a way to get around all those benefits that we have determined as a state legislature are important for employees in the workforce in the state to have. So this bill is a small effort to incentivize and take away some of the willingness for employers to knowingly, and that's the operative word, to knowingly either not pay the prevailing wage or to misclassify employees. Amendment 1 is technical. Amendment 2 strikes criminal penalties, clarifies the nature of the violations, that a commissioner must refer to the comptroller, and that's what this bill is about, that if in fact the department finds that an employer has knowingly misclassified an employee or not paid the prevailing wage, it requires a referral to the comptroller's office to look into possible tax evasion. I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 838 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. We'll stick with finance. We've got calendar number 15. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 140, Senator Jackson, State Highways Administration Fallen Heroes Fishing Creek Bridge designation, favorable to amendments.
Chair recognizes the minority whip as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. As amended, Senate Bill 140 will require the State Highway Administration to name the bridge across Fishing Creek on Maryland Route 261 in Calvert County as the Fallen Heroes Fishing Creek Bridge. Amendment number 1 makes changes to the title of the bill, and the second amendment requires the State Highway Administration to name instead of designate the bridge as the Fallen Heroes Fishing Creek Bridge. There was no opposition at the committee hearing, Mr. President, and I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objection to the 2 committee amendments? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the favorable committee report as amended. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 140 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 496, Senator Kramer, Consumer Credit Commercial Financing Transactions, favorable of 2 amendments.
Chair recognizes the Senator from Montgomery County as the floor leader.
Yes, thank you. Good morning again, colleagues. Colleagues, this bill may look familiar to you as this body passed it unanimously last year. This bill is in response to a significant problem that we have that sort of regards what we banned a number of years ago, and that's payday loans to consumers. This is that payday loans, but it's to small business owners and operators. It has been the Wild West. It has gone on without regulation, and this is commercial financing and funding where small mom and pop businesses are being preyed upon by big commercial lenders taking full advantage of them. So the legislation before you, for the first time, starts to put in some clarity and transparency so that our small business owners, our mom and pop business owners, have a greater understanding of what it is they are signing when they decide to take one of these kinds of loans. Most importantly, it requires an annual percentage rate be shown to them because historically some of these loans can be 100, 200, 300+% interest rates, and these small mom and pop businesses get caught up in a spiral, and eventually they lose their assets, they go out of business. This is an effort to protect small business in our state. The bill before you matches exactly what the state of New York has done, which also matches what California has done. And the logic behind that is the industry came in and said, please don't do patchwork regulations, be consistent. So this is consistent with 2 of the largest states in our nation. There are some amendments. The first changes the title of the bill. The second clarifies the applicability of a certain reporting requirement relating to sales-based financing. And the amendment also exempts from the bill certain purchase money obligations. There is no fiscal impact. The bill passed the committee unanimously. Mr. President, I move the amendments and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objection to the two committee amendments? Without objection, the two committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 496 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 554, the President, Maryland National Guard TRICARE Premium Reimbursement Program Establishment Healthcare for Heroes Act of 2023, favorable with one amendment.
Chair recognizes the chair of the committee as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 554 is also an administrative bill. It establishes a TRICARE premium reimbursement program in the military department so that we can award grants to reimburse members of the Maryland National Guard for a portion of their insurance premiums, both health and dental. The committee adopted an amendment that establishes a cap on the amount of the grant award. And so now, as amended, the grant award that may be reimbursed is $60, up to $60 of the total amount of the premiums. With that, Mr. President, I move the adoption of the amendment and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? If not, all in favor of the amendment say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The one committee amendment is adopted. Question now on the favorable report is amended. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 554 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 589, Senator Hayes, Baltimore City Alcoholic Beverages Related Event Promoters Permit, favorable with one amendment.
All right, Chair recognizes the senator from Baltimore City as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 589, as amended, extends the sunset to June 30th, 2024 for certain provisions associated with the related event promoters permit issued by the Baltimore City Liquor Board of Commissioners. The related event promoters permit was established to provide for events related to CIAA. In addition, the bill shortens the time frame for applicants to apply for a permit, for the board to grant or deny a permit, and for a permit to be altered before the scheduled related event. The bill also changes the standard for determining permit fees and clarifies that a related event includes an event for which tickets are sold to the public either in advance or at the door, for which a cover charge is imposed. The amendment alters the sunset date in the bill for provisions associated with related event promoters permit from June 30, 2025 to 24. There is no fiscal impact. There is no opposition at the committee hearing. I move the amendment and the adoption of a favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objection to the committee amendment? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. The question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 589 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 793, Center West, Consumer Protection Motor Vehicle Glass Repair or Replacement Advanced Driver Assistance System Recalibration, favorable, one amendment.
Chair recognizes the Senator from Anne Arundel as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 793 is a consumer protection bill. It has to do with these fancy new windshields in cars that do all kinds of automated driver assistance systems. And they can detect nearby obstacles and driver errors and assist the driver in the safe operation of a vehicle. So what this bill requires is that if you're going to have a new windshield installed in your vehicle, that the consumer will know up front that it may need to be recalibrated so that these special operations can be calibrated and work properly again. So the bill requires that recalibration performed by a facility meet or exceed the manufacturer's specifications, prohibits a facility from charging for services that are not performed or successfully completed, and requires the facility to inform the consumer if recalibration is not performed or successfully completed. The amendment requires that the statement provided to a customer be a written statement and makes a technical correction. I move the amendment and the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections to the committee amendment? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 793 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 806, Senator Heddleman, Maryland Health Benefits Exchange and Maryland Department of Health Healthcare Coverage for Undocumented Immigrants Report. Favorable to amendments.
Chair recognizes the senator from Howard County as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 806 requires the Maryland Health Benefit Exchange and the Department of Health to develop a report comparing options for offering affordable health care coverage to state residents who are ineligible for Medicaid, the Maryland Children's Health Insurance Program, also known as MCHIP, or a qualified health plan due to immigration status. The report must also include a comparison of the cost to the state, the impact of the uninsured, potential benefits designs, and the implementation considerations for offering coverage to technically and financially eligible individuals, but for immigration status, through Medicaid and MCHIP and qualified health plans offered through the exchange. The report comparison must also examine offering coverage to all eligible individuals, individuals aged 21 and younger, individuals who are at least age 65, and low-income individuals only. The state is already spending $118 million per year on folks who are otherwise eligible for Medicaid but for their immigration status, and these folks are still able to access care through our emergency departments because of federal law. This report looks to be able to find cost savings in being able to provide coverage that these folks are already receiving. There are two amendments. The first amendment makes a change to the bill title and adds a sponsor. Amendment 2 requires the study to also include an analysis of offering dental coverage. There is no fiscal impact. Move the adoption of the two committee amendments in the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the two committee amendments in the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objection to the two committee amendments? Without objection, two committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the favorable committee report as amended. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 806 is hereby ordered printed for third reader. Clerk, read the next. Oop. Does that do it? That does it. Let's go to Education, Energy, and the Environment. This is report number 14. Clerk, read the first bill.
Senate Bill 414, Senator Augustine, Commission to Advance and Strengthen Firefighting within Maryland. Favorable to amendments.
Chair recognizes the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, we all know that we have a real labor crisis in the space of our first responders, both volunteer and career, and that there really are some really unique challenges associated with the profession. So Senate Bill 414, as amended, establishes the Commission to Advance and Strengthen Firefighting and Emergency Medical Services within Maryland. The Commission must study and make recommendations related to enhancing and supporting career and volunteer firefighting and emergency medical services in the state. The Maryland Department of Labor must provide staff for the Commission, and the Commission must report its findings and recommendations to the Governor and the General Assembly on or before December 1st, 2023. There are two committee amendments. Amendment number 1 is technical. Amendment number 2 expands the purpose of the Commission to include the advancement and strengthening of emergency medical services in addition to the firefighting. Mr. President, I move adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the two committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the two committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 414 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 434, Senator Klossmeyer, Natural Resources Restorative Aquaculture Pilot Program. Favorable.
Chair recognizes the senator from District 10 as the floor leader.
Thanks, Mr. President. Senate Bill 434 requires the Department of Natural Resources to establish and implement a restorative aquaculture pilot program to provide financial incentives to a holder of an aquaculture lease who maintains their lease or part of their lease under specific restorative conditions for at least 4 years. The pilot program terminates September 30th, 2029. There are no committee amendments. Mr. President, I ask that we move the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. Senator, I hear there was some smoked turkey that went to JPR that didn't make its way to the State House this week. So JPR got a bit of a treat, rumor has it.
Thanks, Mr. President.
All right, on the report, any further discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 434 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 471, Senator Elfreth, Water Pollution Control Discharge Permit, Stormwater associated with construction activity, favorable with 3 amendments.
Chair recognizes the senator from Howard and Montgomery counties as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, as amended, Senate Bill 471 requires the Maryland Department of the Environment to review and update state specifications for sediment control plans every 5 years. The amended bill also establishes enhanced public comment requirements for construction activities in certain sensitive areas. There are 3 committee amendments. The first one is technical. The second one adds language requiring the department to review and update the specifications for sediment control plans on or before December 1st, 2024, and every 5 years thereafter. The third amendment strikes language that would have established enhanced permit requirements for construction activities in sensitive areas, and instead requires the department, upon written request, to extend the public notice and comment period on applications for specified permit applications to 60 days. This final amendment also strikes language related to local enforcement and enhanced penalties for construction permit violations. I'd like to move the 3 committee amendments and the favorable committee reports.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 3 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, 3 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the favorable report is amended. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 471 is hereby ordered printed for third reader. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 517, Carroll County Senators, Port of Deposit State Historical Park, included areas. Favorable 2 amendments. This is an emergency bill.
Chair recognizes the senator from Cecil County as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. As amended, Senate Bill 517 is an emergency bill that extends the deadline for the Bainbridge Development Corporation to transfer specified properties to the Department of Natural Resources for inclusion in the Port of Deposit State Historical Park. There are 2 committee amendments. The first amendment makes technical changes and adds a co-sponsor, and the second amendment strikes language that would have altered the areas to be included in the park and instead reconstitutes a stakeholder advisory committee to advise the Department of Natural Resources on the scope and management of the park. The amendment also extends the deadline for transferring specified properties owned by the Bainbridge Development Corporation and requires the department to preserve the properties in perpetuity for their archaeological, historical, and cultural significance. I would like to move for adoption of the 2 committee amendments and for the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objection to the 2 committee amendments? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 517 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 634, Senator Mount, Natural Resources, Oyster Inspection and Severance Taxes Increase, favorable 2 amendments.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 38th District as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill, Senate Bill 634, updates the tax structure for oyster replenishment and restoration. It increases the severance tax from $1 per bushel to $2 per bushel that is levied on every bushel of oysters caught within the limits of the natural oyster bars of the state, exclusive of the Potomac River. The bill also increases the inspection tax from 30 cents per bushel to $1 per bushel that is levied on marketable oysters shipped in the shell to any place outside of the state. And finally, the bill requires that $1 of every $2 of the severance tax collected be distributed to the county oyster committees for the repletion of natural oyster bars located in the counties, in the waters of certain counties. This legislation is supported by the Maryland Watermen's Association, the Talbot Watermen's Association, and the Maryland Oystermen's Association, and Delmarva Fisheries Association. There are 2 committee amendments. The amendment number 1 is technical, and the amendment number 2, it repeals the obsolete language relating to a tax increase that occurred in 1982 and adds Baltimore County to the list of counties where oyster repletion activities may occur. I move the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report.
All right, floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 634 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 719, Share Education, Energy, and the Environment, Public Safety, State Fuel Security Program, favorable to amendments.
Chair recognizes the President Pro Tem as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 719 is a departmental bill from the Maryland Energy Administration. This bill establishes a state fuel security program to gather and analyze energy-related data in preparation for energy emergencies. There are 2 committee amendments. Amendment 1 is technical. Amendment 2 strikes language that would have authorized the administration to establish a fuel set-aside program during energy emergencies, retaining only the bill's data collection provisions. The amendment also strikes the bill's criminal penalties and civil enforcement provisions and substitute language establishing administrative penalties. I move adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 719 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Does that do it for that calendar? Let's see. Yep, it does. All right, let's stay with Education, Energy, and the Environment, Calendar 15. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 111, Senator Kagan, Election Law, Campaign Finance, Draft Committees, and Exploratory Committees, favorable with 3 amendments.
Chair recognizes the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill closes a loophole that has existed in our election law and also adds clarification related to our draft committees or exploratory committees. Candidates from both parties have taken advantage of this opportunity, and yet it's not clear how they should be governed. So this bill says that they should be disclosing their donors on the same format and the same schedule that we do. It also establishes what they can spend money on, so and also clarifies that there is no limit. After one of 3 things happens, either the candidate decides to run and files officially, or announces that he or she will not run, or the third is the filing deadline passes, the committee would have 120 days to close the account. The funding can be distributed in one of several ways. It can be distributed pro rata back to the people who donated. It can be given to the state or local political party. It can be given to a nonprofit of their choice, or given to the Fair Campaign Fund. So those are the options. The amendment do just that. The first one is technical. The second one clarifies what I've indicated about defining terms and clarifies the applicability in terms of what you can spend money on. So it's basically stuff like renting headquarters, buying computers, paying staff, and all that. And then the third one is the one that clarifies about no limits because of Supreme Court decision and all that. So there's a First Amendment piece to that. So they can accept unlimited money, but they should disclose it. With that, I move the favorable report with the 3 amendments.
All right, the floor leader moves to the adoption of the 3 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, Chair recognizes the minority whip.
Thank you, Mr. President. Could I ask maybe 1 or 2 questions?
Of course.
Senator, may proceed.
Thank you. So I think you mentioned this, but how long after the filing deadline passes or the candidate announces they're not running do they have to disperse their money? Not their money, the money.
Yes, that would be 120 days.
Okay, that
4
was
months.
120
We
days.
were wavering as to what's long enough but short enough.
What's current law now?
Current law doesn't really speak to exploratory or draft committees.
Okay, so current law with draft committees is that they can exist, correct? And that they can, is it unlimited donations right now, or is it the same limits that we have?
It's unlimited, and that will not change. So if you want to give $100 million to draft Joe
The
Schmo
minority
for
whip
governor,
for, yes,
no,
right.
minority whip for governor, that is legal, and that would remain legal under this
The
this
majority
bill.
whip. I shouldn't make it personal. The majority whip for government. That's right. Okay. And that would not change, but this outlines more what you're allowed to spend money on.
There needs to be transparency so that if someone does file, if someone is elected, that there is an awareness. Oh, this is the person, this is the entity that gave $1 million, and now they're getting a big contract. Now they're getting a big job. There just ought to be that level of disclosure.
Okay. Mr. President, I wonder if I could lay the bill over. I know it's loud. I want to lay it over so I can read it and look at it. We have a lot on the floor today, so if I'm going to ask have the bill lie over under the rule.
And Senator's motion is in order. The bill and the amendment will lay over under the rule. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 482, Senator Lewis Young, Janet L. Hoffman Loan Assistance Repayment Program, Mental Health Professionals in Public Schools, favorable to amendments.
Chair recognizes the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill expands eligibility for the Janet Hoffman Loan Assistance Repayment Program to include mental health professionals. We all know that we have a real shortage of mental health professionals in our public schools. At the same time, we have a spiraling increase in mental health challenges among our children. So what the bill does is says that if an individual, a professional, receives a graduate, professional, or undergraduate degree from any accredited college or university, or they've been employed in a public school in the state for at least 1 year, and the Maryland Higher Education Commission Office of Student Financial Aid publicizes the program, that individual can qualify for this loan program. There are 2 amendments. One makes a technical change to the purpose of the program, and the second amendment actually extends the minimum service obligation to 2 years instead of 1 year. The fiscal note is minimal. The expenses can be handled by the current program. I move adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. Thank you.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objection to the 2 committee amendments? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the favorable report as amended. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 482 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 620, Senator Heddleman, Institutions of Higher Education, Sports Wagering Contracts Prohibition, favorable to amendments.
Chair recognizes the Senator from Prince George's as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, this bill ensures that Maryland colleges and universities don't fall into the same rabbit hole as suffered in other states. Michigan State University received an $8.4 million contract from Caesars Sportsbook to push students and faculty and alumni to bet on their sites. Same can be said for Louisiana State University, University of Colorado Boulder. No less than half a dozen across the country have done this. This bill prohibits an institution of higher education from entering into a contract with a regulated gaming entity or its agent if, under the terms of the contract, the institution receives a commission, a bonus, or any other incentive payment based on the success of securing student participation in sports wagering or online sports wagering. Allowable contracts between an institution and a regulated gaming entity or its agent are subject to public inspection in accordance with the Maryland Public Information Act. Regulated gaming entity means a mobile sports wagering licensee, an online sports wagering operator, or sports wagering licensee. Agent of a regulated gaming entity includes a marketing firm or other similar entity contracted to perform gaming-related services for a regulated gaming entity. There are 2 committee amendments. The first is technical. The second amendment prohibits the institution of higher education from entering into a contract with a sports marketing entity that enters into a contract with a regulated gaming entity or its agent that would allow the activity otherwise prohibited by the bill. There are no fiscal impacts, no opposition. I move the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report.
The floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. Chair recognizes the senator from Charles County.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Question for the floor leader.
Will the floor leader yield? Appears so. Senator may proceed.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Senator, are there any institutions in Maryland that have entered into any contracts like this bill is seeking to prohibit?
Not that we're aware of.
Okay. Are there any contracts pending that will be affected by this?
Not that we're aware of.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank
All
you,
right.
sir.
On the amendments, any further discussion? If not, any objection to the 2 committee amendments? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the favorable report as amended. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 620 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. We've got a 3rd one out of Education, Energy, and the Environment. Report number 16. Clerk, read the first bill.
Senate Bill 31, Senator Carter, Baltimore City Board of School Commissioners, student members, and task force to study compensation and student members. Favorable 1 amendment.
Chair recognizes the senator from Baltimore City and County as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill does 2 things. As you may know, a couple years ago, Baltimore City, and this is a Baltimore City bill, moved from a fully appointed model to a hybrid model that some of our other jurisdictions have. What this bill does is that there is a student board member, and they are, at the moment, under current law, they have to be, it's establishing and further establishing some qualifications for the student member, and also it establishes a task force. In the bill, it makes sure that the student board member is a regularly enrolled junior or senior in Baltimore City Public Schools. And we are expanding the voting rights of the student board member to include issues related to capital, the operating budget, school closings, reopenings, all matters around the operations of the school, except that the student is still prohibited from voting on matters relating to personnel and collective bargaining. Additionally, the Baltimore City School Board of Commissioners is not compensated as it is in other jurisdictions, and so this task force establishes a group to study this, and the task force must do 3 things. 1, it has to study compensation of all existing boards, study the possibility and the potential effect of adding a 2nd student member to the board, and finally make recommendations about the amount of compensation, if they were to do it, and its impact on overall revenues and the budget. The report is due by April 21st. There is 1 committee amendment. There's a committee amendment that strikes the provision of allowing middle school students to vote on the student board. I move for the adoption of the 1 committee amendment and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 1 committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 1 committee amendment is adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 31 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 271, Senator Reedy, Education, Maryland Civic Education or Engagement Program established. Favorable 2 amendments.
Chair recognizes the senator from District 10 as the floor leader.
Thanks, Mr. President. Senate Bill 271 establishes the Maryland Civic Engagement Program as a voluntary program in which local school systems may participate to recognize students and public schools that promote the civic readiness and civic engagement of students in the public school. The bill establishes minimal standards for participating local school systems to 1, award a student seal of civic engagement, and 2, designate a public school as a center of civic engagement. Participating school systems must recognize students and schools that meet the requirements for the civic engagement program as specified. There are 2 committee amendments. Amendment number 1 makes technical changes to the bill's title. Amendment number 2 alters the name of the program to the Maryland Civic Excellence Program, provides that the program begins in 2024-2025 school year, alters certain activities for which a student can receive program points, and alters the threshold for schools to achieve a Center Civic Excellence designation from 75% to 50% of the students having earned a seal of civic excellence. Mr. President, I move the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objection to the 2 committee amendments? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 271 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 302, Senator Mouts, Talbot County Board of Education, election of officers, favorable.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 38th District as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. SB 302 is a simple bill. It requires the Talbot County Board of Education to elect a president and vice president from among its members at the last meeting at the end of each calendar year or at the meeting in December each year. There are no committee amendments, and I move adoption of a favorable committee report.
All right, floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 302 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 402, Senator Hershey, Kent County Board of Education, student member, favorable with 1 amendment.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 38th as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 402 is another amendment. This is a bill that deals simply with codifying that a non-voting student member of the Kent County Board of Education, it codifies that into statute. And it specifies the selection method and responsibilities of that student member. The student member serves a 1-year term, and the initial term of the student member must begin on July 1st, 2024. There is one committee amendment. It clarifies that the eligibility criteria for that student member and strikes a requirement that the new student member attend certain Board of Education meetings before the start of their term. It also prohibits the non-voting student member from attending an executive session of the board. I move the 1 committee amendment and move for a favorable report on SB 402.
All right, the floor leader moves for the adoption of the 1 committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 1 committee amendment is adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 402 is hereby ordered printed for 3rd reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 585, Senator Hester, Career and Technical Education Committee, alterations, favorable.
Chair recognizes the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, this bill passed unanimously last year, Senate Bill 478. It increases the number of members of the Career and Technical Education Committee to include representation from skilled trade organization and career colleges. It also expands the duties of the committee to develop a list of skilled trade organizations and career colleges and share that list with guidance counselors. There are no committee amendments. I move the favorable report.
All right, floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. Chair recognizes Vice Chair Budget and Tax.
Mr. President, I discussed this with the floor manager and sponsor. I'd like to special order the bill to the appropriate time on Thursday.
On Thursday. All right, any objections? Without objection, so ordered. The bill will be special ordered at the appropriate time on Thursday. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 822, Senator McKay, Pathways and Technical Early College, High School, P-TECH Program, High School Diplomas, favorable.
Chair recognizes the senator from District 10 as the floor leader.
Thanks, Mr. President. Colleagues, Senate Bill 822 requires that each pathway in technology, early college, high, that's better known as P-TECH, students receive a high school diploma immediately following completion of high school graduation requirements. by adding to the requirements of memoranda of understanding establishing P-TECH schools. The bill must not be construed or alter any funding calculations under Title 5, 7, and 16 of the educational article. The bill takes effect July 1, 2023. There are no committee amendments.
All right, the floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 822 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. All right, we have a consent calendar. I think our first consent of the year. This is Education, Energy, and the Environment. Consent calendar number 1. Clerk will read the calendar.
Report of the Committee on the Education, Energy, and the Environment. This is consent calendar number 1.
Chair recognizes the Senator from Frederick City as the floor leader.
Yes, all 4 of these bills are consent calendar bills. They're all sunset extensions. They all extend the sunset by 10 years. There are no committee amendments. There is no fiscal note. I move for adoption of the favorable committee report.
All right, Senators, please take a quick look at the consent calendar. Are there any bills that Senators wish to separate off of the consent calendar? If not, the floor leader has moved for the adoption of the favorable committee report for all bills on the calendar. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report is adopted, and the bills on consent calendar number 1 are ordered printed for third reading. Let's go to stay with Education, Energy, and the Environment. This is report number 18. Clerk will read the bill.
Senate Bill 62, Senator Augustine, Land Use, Public Service Companies, Pollinator-Friendly Vegetation Management, favorable to amendments.
Chair recognizes the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill prohibits a local government from imposing any unreasonable limitation on pollinator-friendly vegetation management, including a land use restriction performed or overseen by a public service company maintaining its property if the public service company has exclusive rights to maintain the property, right-of-way, or easement, and maintains and regularly tends to the pollinator-friendly vegetation management. There are 2 committee amendments. Amendment 1 makes technical changes. Amendment 2 applies the prohibition in the bill to utility-designated pollinator areas as defined, includes various mowing methods into the definition of pollinator-friendly vegetation management, modifies required mowing practices, and clarifies that mowing practices are not restricted outside of a utility-designated area, and clarifies that the bill does not limit noxious weed laws or activities outside of the utility-designated area. I move the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objection to the 2 committee amendments? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now on the amended report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 62 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 445, Senator Hayes, Appraisal Gap from Historic Redlining Financial Assistance Program Alterations.
Chair recognizes the Senator from Baltimore City and County as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill builds on legislation that we passed in 2021 that established the appraisal gap from Historic Redlining Financial Assistance Program within DHCD. And the purpose of the program was to provide financial assistance to make up the difference between what a property is appraised at and what it sells for. This can happen from a number of reasons, but the reasons addressed here is the historic redlining of communities, particularly in urban areas, from getting from banking institutions that were not lending in those areas. Additionally, this bill and the purpose of this bill is to support those that want to develop affordable housing. So this legislation expands this program to include financial assistance for affordable housing developments to sustainable communities. The bill establishes as a qualified project receiving financial assistance those having that designation. There are no committee amendments, so I ask for your your adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 445 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 524, Senator McKay, Garrett County Board of County Commissioners meetings, favorable to amendments.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 35th District as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill requires the Garrett County Commissioners to hold public meetings in person or over video broadcast at least twice a month. There are two committee amendments. The first one makes technical changes. The second amendment authorizes the Garrett County Commissioners to live video stream their meetings instead of holding them via video broadcast. Additionally, the amendments prohibit 2 consecutive meetings from being held without a formal declaration of an emergency. I'd like to move the 2 committee amendments and for adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objection to the 2 amendments? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the favorable report as amended. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 524 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 733, Carroll County Senators, Carroll County Commissioner Districts, alterations, favorable. This is an emergency bill.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 35th District as the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. This emergency bill modifies the Carroll County Commissioner District Plan as enacted by Chapter 34 of the 2021 special session and Chapter 102 of the 2022 regular session in order to consolidate smaller census tracts into larger neighboring tracts. There are no committee amendments, so I move for adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. On the report, any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 733 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 842, Senator Kramer, Maryland Holocaust Remembrance Day, favorable with 1 amendment.
Chair recognizes the senator from Frederick City as the floor leader.
Thank you very much. This bill requires the governor to annually proclaim January 27th as Maryland Holocaust Remembrance Day. That would conform with International Remembrance Holocaust Day. And the reason why January 27th is important is that that was the date in 1945 when Auschwitz was liberated. So what this would require in the proclamation by the governor is that January 27th would be a day of reflection to remember the human tragedy that was the Holocaust and to spread the lessons of the reality of the Holocaust to future generations so that we may never forget the consequences of prejudice, bigotry, ignorance, and hate. There was 1 committee amendment, and that adds co-sponsors, no fiscal note. I move for adoption of the amendments and the favorable committee report. Thank you.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 1 committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any objections? Without objection, the 1 committee amendment is adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 842 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. All right, we're going to move to budget and tax. Calendar 12. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 112, Senator Kagan, State Finance and Procurement Grants, Prompt Payment Requirement, favorable with 1 amendment.
Chair recognizes the senator from Baltimore County as the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Senate Bill 112, as amended, establishes that it's the policy of the state to make payment under specified grant agreements within 37 days of the payment becoming due under the grant agreement, or if later, receiving a proper invoice. Interest accrues at the rate of 9% per year on any amount that is due and payable and remains unpaid after 37 days if a proper invoice was not submitted to the comptroller within 30 days by the grant-making entity. The bill takes effect June 1, 2023, and there is 1 amendment. The amendment alters the definition of a grant. It repeals the definition of late payment. It alters the time period within which it's the policy of the state to make payments under the grant agreement from 30 days to 37 days. It makes a grant-making entity liable for interest on the amount for which the grant-making entity has received and failed to submit an invoice to the comptroller within 30 days. It alters the time period from which interest begins to accrue from the 31st day to the 38th day after the date on which the grant-making entity receives the proper invoice. It repeals language specifying that a grant-making entity review an invoice not later than 5 days after receipt, and it requires the comptroller to make payment on a proper invoice within 5 business days rather than 1 business day. And finally, it specifies that the requirements of the bill don't create any liability on the comptroller for interest accrued on late payment. I move the adoption of the amendment and the committee report.
All right, floor leader moves for the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 112 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 354, Senator Guile, Income Tax Checkoff Maryland Veterans Trust Fund, favorable with one amendment.
Chair recognizes the senator from Prince George's as the floor leader.
Good morning, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 354, as amended, establishes the Maryland Veterans Trust Fund, MVTF, checkoff on the individual income tax return form. After the comptroller deducts administrative expenses, the contributions are contributed to the Maryland Veterans Trust Fund. Expenses. The contributions are credited to the Maryland Veterans Trust Fund. The bill takes effect July the 1st, 2023, and applies to tax years 25 and beyond. There is one amendment. The amendment delays the implementation of the checkoff to begin in the tax year 225 and adds co-sponsors to the bill. I move adoption of the committee report.
All right, floor leader moves for the adoption of the one committee amendment and the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? Any objections to the amendment? Without objection, the one committee amendment is adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 354 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 454, Senator Elfreth, State Police Retirement System, Law Enforcement Officers Pension System, and Judges Retirement System, Surviving Spouses Benefit, Same-Sex Spouses, favorable.
Chair recognizes the bill sponsor as the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Colleagues, there's a simple rule with pensions. The longer the bill, the simpler the fix. This bill is no different. It's an equity bill at the end of the day. It would put the same retirees in same-sex marriages in the same posture as every other retiree when it comes to the state police retirement system, the law enforcement officers pension system, and the judges retirement system. So those couples who retired before January 1st, 2013, or when the state recognized same-sex marriage, to convert their optional retirement allowance for a surviving same-sex spouse to an unreduced balance, thereby making their surviving spouse eligible for the full spousal benefit. Mr. President, we had a number of couples who signed up, registered for the benefit prior to marriage equality, and their beneficiaries are receiving a lower allowance. And so this bill would allow for 1 year for a conversion for those affected, and that it would require the documentation to be submitted by December 31st, 2023. The bill takes effect July 1st, 2023, and terminates June 30, 2024. We put that 1 year to make sure we're giving people the opportunity across the board. There are no committee amendments, Mr. President. I move the adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 454 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 661, the President Unemployment Insurance Tax Priority for Delayed Payments of Benefits, favorable to amendment.
Chair recognizes the senator from Montgomery County as the floor leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Senate Bill 661 is a departmental bill. Colleagues, if you might remember in the 2021 session, this General Assembly passed the Relief Act. And under the Relief Act, those individuals who were claiming unemployment insurance weren't taxed on it. And what this bill sets to address is those, and that applied for calendar years 20 and 21, and the people that this legislation benefits all did the right thing. They all applied for their unemployment benefits, and that time frame that the General Assembly specified that would be ease their tax burden. But because of all the delays with the Department of Labor, they didn't actually receive their unemployment benefit until the next year. So what this does is, this is creating tax fairness where they're going to get a refund on really a Department of Labor error, where they're going to get a refund on the taxes that they owed on their unemployment benefit. So there was no opposition, and there was 2 committee amendments. The first makes technical changes to the title, and the second just clarifies the Department of Labor communicating with the Comptroller's Office. So I would move the amendments and the adoption of favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable committee report. On the amendments, any discussion? Any objections? Without objection, the 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 661 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 722, Chair, Budget and Taxation Committee, State Department of Assessments and Taxation Mandatory Retirement Age Repeal, favorable.
Chair recognizes the senator from Montgomery County as the floor
Thank
leader.
you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 722 is a departmental bill that repeals the mandatory retirement age of 70 years for the Director of the State Department of Assessments and Taxation and a County Supervisor of Assessments. There are no committee amendments, and I move adoption of the favorable committee report. 70 is not old anymore.
No, but it's fascinating. There was like judges. I had no idea. All right, the floor leader moves for the adoption of the favorable committee report. On the amendment, any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 722 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 723, Chair and Budget Taxation Committee, Corporations and Associations, Electronic Copies Fees, repeal, favorable.
Chair recognizes Vice Chair of the Committee as the floor leader.
Thank you very, very much. This is a small step to bring SDAT into the 21st century. Business associations and corporations register with SDAT to prove the existence, and periodically they need copies of their certificates for various business purposes. And historically, the department has charged $1 for each copy. Now that we have email, the department has proposed dropping the $1 fee for digital transmission of these certificates. The fiscal cost to the state is less than $100,000. No amendments. Unanimous. Move the favorable report.
Floor leader moves to the adoption of the favorable committee report. On the report, any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 723 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. We've got a special order calendar, number 29. Clerk will read the bill.
Senate Bill 545, Senator Muse, towing or removal of vehicles, reclamation hours. Question is on the adoption of the favorable report.
All right, question is on the adoption of the favorable committee report. Chair recognizes the minority whip.
Mr. President, I was the maker of the motion. My questions have been answered.
Questions have been answered. All right, on the report, any further discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 545 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. We have one additional special order bill. If we could call up the bill for the end of the calendar. Clerk will read the bill.
Senate Bill 686, Senator Smith, Civil Actions, Child Sexual Abuse, Definition, Damages, and Statute of Limitations, the Child Victims Act of 2023. Question is on the adoption of the 8 committee amendments in the favorable report.
All right, the question was on the 8 committee amendments. Chair recognizes the minority whip.
Mr. President, I wonder if I could ask the chairman to yield for, or the floor leader to yield for a couple questions.
Will the floor leader yield? Senator may proceed.
So I don't want to retrod ground from last night, but it was late last night, and I just want to be sure that that we make it clear. It's obviously a very important issue. It's a very important issue. And I don't think there's anybody in this chamber who doesn't want to try to find justice for people who have been dealing with this. I think the challenge is there are some things about this bill that are pretty far-reaching that could impact beyond, I think, the intended targets, for lack of a better term. So I think the question, a couple of questions, one of which is, my friend from Baltimore County talked about last night. We don't really have any idea the impact in the public sector about this. This opens up a lot of, there's no statute of limitations if we do this, and it retroactively opens it up. If the court does find that this is constitutional, which I think there's some questions about, this opens up state government, county government, local government to lawsuits up to a certain cap, as well as any private entity. So it's not just like a large organization, correct? It opens it up. So the question I would have would be, do we have any idea how expensive that could be if someone is able to sue from, say, 40 or 50 years ago? If literally hundreds or thousands of people can bring a suit, do we have any frame of reference of how expensive that may end up being?
So first, I think, yes, you've identified that there's a private side of the house and then there's a public side of the house, and that the constitutional issues largely reside on the private side. But moving that to your direct question about cost, I don't think it's possible to quantify the cost, because I don't know how many cases there are out there, or people that are out there that could potentially have cases. And that's why, again, we talked about the caps. That's why we put in caps in the committee. That's why I ensured that we capped that liability for the state and locals and the school boards at $850,000, and on the private side at 1.5. And across the nation, I think the 22 states that have done this, there are no caps, and they have not seen the type of radical exposure to fiscal liability and trouble that I think we're all very rightfully thinking about in this body. And so if those states' examples can be instructive to what we can do here, I think I would just point to those examples.
Thank you. And just a follow-up, Mr. President, are those states did they all pass something identical to this, or I'm sure it's not identical, but similar, or did they have the same unlimited look back and unlimited statute of limit? I mean, getting rid of the entire statute of limitations.
So no, it's
retroactively.
It's a patchwork, and I can pull up the numbers here. I'm pulling it up. I had it on my phone a little bit earlier, but it's a patchwork. Some states have done it with 2 years, some have done it with 5 years, and Maine, Nevada, Vermont, plus Guam and the Northern Marina Islands have done an unlimited look back. So there are 3 states that have done an unlimited look back. They've all done it within the last couple of years, 2021, 2019. The rest of the 20 or 19 or so states have various degrees of look back.
And it affects both public and private in those states.
Correct. And remember, they have no caps on the privates.
Okay. So far it's been soon, but so far in those states we haven't seen a run on the bank, so to speak.
No, and I have a chart that kind of shows you
Yeah.
again.
Okay.
But just being honest with you, again, those states have various different schemes of the look back window. So,
Okay.
but
Right.
there have
So
been very, very small number of claims is the point.
Okay. Is it fair to say, though, ours is the most aggressive of any of the 22 states if we pass this?
No, it's not, because of Maine, Nevada.
Okay, because they have no caps. Okay.
They have no cap on look back. They go back. They do an infinite look back.
Okay, another question. I'm bouncing around a little bit on themes because there's I've been on this committee before, but I hadn't had the opportunity to really hear the new testimony on this. When I talk to folks outside of here, they talk about how one of the concerns I have is that unlike, say, medical malpractice, where if I say I was injured in a medical operation, the doctor messed up, I want to sue, I can't just show up and sue and be in court right away. There's some hurdles to getting in court to assure that we don't have frivolous lawsuits. With this would be a civil proceeding. You literally could claim something. Somebody could claim abuse from a county-run day camp from 42 years ago, and they could be in court, not the next day, but very quickly, and they could be in front of a jury of 6 people. And if the county, in this example, doesn't have any records from before, and that person says, well, I was at that day camp, I could show I was at that day camp, and I was molested there, and I'm suing, it's a preponderance of evidence standard, and it's because it's civil. So is there anything, I was told, I've heard different things. Is there anything in the bill that would say, no, you have to have actual documented proof?
No, so you're right to point out the difference between this and a med-mal. So med-mal is like an actual board
Right.
that reviews.
Yeah.
But here, obviously, you mentioned the burden. So there's a preponderance of the evidence burden. The burden is on the plaintiff. Okay. Then there are two legal mechanisms that come to mind, and then a couple other just logistical things that would factor into this decision making. One is you could do summary judgment, you could do a motion for summary judgment, you could file a 12B motion to dismiss. All these things could happen before the case proceeds.
Okay.
Okay. So you've got two legal mechanisms that are just coming to mind, but then also the same factual difficulties that exist for the defendant also exist for the plaintiff, meaning that, remember, these are cases that deal with negligent supervision, negligent hiring, and the like. So you're going to have to find witnesses, you're going to have to find documents, and so if it's from 50 years ago, it's going to be hard. Witnesses are dead, documents are lost and gone. Organizations no longer exist. So the same difficulties that exist on the plaintiff side exist on the defendant side, and vice versa. And so it's the judge's decision to sift through that, and yes, preponderance of the evidence, burden on the plaintiff to make a sound and wise decision. That's how it works.
But to be clear, and thank you for the answer, but to be clear, the reason we have a statute of limitations is because if someone is alive, they can present something, and they can present a piece of evidence that they were in that situation, but they don't have to present evidence that something actually happened. Obviously, anytime we sue, sometimes it's a word against somebody's word against somebody else's. The reason you have a statute of limitations on civil suits in general is because the expectation is, and it's why it's so dangerous to do a whole look back, because folks were not keeping records for 60 or 70 or 40 or 50 years. And so they have no way to defend themselves. And again, my concern is not large organizations where there's a documented pattern of abuse. I'm happy to throw the book at any government entity, any nonprofit or private entity that there's that. I have no issue with that. It's that we have lots and lots of organizations in this state, and there's lots of small towns and county governments that this is going to impact, and it's only a preponderance of evidence standard. So I just want to be, and I understand where you're coming from, but just to be clear, this bill doesn't have anything special we've added, correct, to protect against the rights of the accused at all, right?
Apart from what's already in the legal justice system right now. So yes, that's it, that's right. And there are strong public policy reasons why we have statutes of limitations and statutes of repose. Now, the Supreme Court of Maryland, or Court of Appeals before, has identified exceptions to those general rules, and we can talk about those a little bit later. But yes, you've identified very strong public policy reasons for those things, but there are legal mechanisms and there are just factual considerations that are already kind of in the legal system to protect the defendant from frivolous claims.
But the example, thank you, the example that my friend from Baltimore County used last night, however, that, for example, we used to in this state, and it was not good policy, we used to put children under the age of 18 in jail with adult populations, and I'm sure many bad things happen.
Still happens a little bit.
Well, we used to put them all there, and without the kind of appropriate safeguards. And now, so you could have, but my point is every state did that. Every state was doing that. So it's one of these things where you're going to go back and someone's going to be able to say, I was in prison. There's not going to be the kind of records, and you could open up that was a good example, correct? It was a good example to say if anybody was in a county jail with adults as a child or a state prison in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, I'm not sure when all the reforms, there was a number of reforms passed at some point, but they could all sue, correct? They could all sue, and they could all sue for up to, I guess it's $890,000 in the bill.
That's right.
And if one won, correct, you could foresee that a whole lot of folks could win. This could be a multi-billion-dollar judgment against government. And again, it would not have to be that you prove that they all had something bad happen to them, because again, if somebody proved it, it's one thing, but we're talking about it's their word against a system that may not have records from that far back. Is that fair to say?
Again, we're kind of doing a cyclical thing, because the same mechanisms for the motions that could be filed and the factual considerations that the judge would sift through on stale evidence, dead witnesses, the same things in order to the benefit of the defendant in this case as well, or the disadvantage of the defendant and the plaintiff. So conceivably, your scenario is is possible, right? I mean, it's conceivably possible that you could have massive claims. And then the policy question is, forget the legal question, but the policy question is, are we going to afford the victims of child sex abuse and rape an opportunity to seek civil justice? As a state, can we say, yes, we're going to allow that person to go back and get their, and seek justice, just an opportunity to seek justice. And that's the policy consideration before you as well.
Absolutely. And so the only issue is, once again, how widely we define that and whether there would, I mean, that's the issue. I think, and thank you for your answers, and I may have a couple of amendments to try to address a couple of concerns. One more question, Mr. President. And this is circular here, right here. What was the rationale for not making sure that those public entities are held to the same standard as private entities? If we're concerned about bankrupting public, and we're not concerned about bankrupting private.
It's the same reason why we have sovereign immunity in the first place. So, for instance, if I were walking down the street at the University of Maryland and I fell down a manhole cover, right? I fell down a hole and I got injured, my recovery would be capped by the current tort claims at $400,000. Same scenario, except I'm on Johns Hopkins University, no caps because it's private. Why do we have the differentiation? It's because we understand that as the government, we are responsible for providing protection, safe security, services, and we're responsible for ensuring that society runs. And there's an interest in ensuring that government functions and does not get exposed to unlimited liability, because we need government to move to thrive as a society. We understand that. That's the policy decision we've made, and that's the whole theory of sovereign immunity anyway. And so that's why you have the difference between the University of Maryland and Johns Hopkins in my scenario. Mm-hmm. And so that was the same logic that I applied here with capping the liability for the publics and capping the liability for the privates at different amounts.
It's an excellent explanation. It's also the reason you have a statute of limitations to help the privates, because it is not reasonable to expect that a company or a private entity, that most of whom would not, especially smaller or mid-size, would not have records from 50 or 60 years ago that would allow them to mount an effective defense. So that's why I think this is a little bit different. I do understand. You're right. That is, of course, the rationale, and I understand it. I also think, well, anyway, Mr. President, thank you for the opportunity of questions. I think I may have a couple of amendments later, but thank you.
All right. On the eight committee amendments, Chair recognizes the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. The floor leader just could yield again, please.
For you. Sir, you may proceed.
Thank you very much. Just to follow up on Minority Whip's questions, I had some conversations from people across the hall there that I thought were very knowledgeable about the legislation as well, too. I was under the impression, in order to go after damages, that there had to be reports of the abuse from what has happened before, cover-ups, moving around the offenders from one place to another place. Is all of that necessary, or does that need to be in place in order to be potentially successful in these claims?
No, I mean, look, apart from the normal rules of evidence and the normal rules of just filing a suit and the civil procedure associated with it, there's no special mechanism that we've built into this bill that would preclude someone from bringing a claim apart from what's already in the civil justice system.
And so, again, is this truly going after the abusers that we all have known about and heard about, or does this, without those types of requirements, does this open, I guess the concern is that this continues to open this up to a lot of claims that these types of events could have happened. Is there a known or should have known requirement that Yes, so this bill is about the negligence of an organization, the failure to once you have either actual or constructive knowledge of this abuse, their negligence to act and say, we continued to hire someone, that person stayed on staff, we didn't do anything. That's what this bill is about. It's about holding those entities liable and responsible for their negligent activity.
And so the knew or should have known, yes, like actual knowledge, someone came, you saw it, or someone, constructive knowledge, someone said, hey, look, Coach so-and-so has been doing this.
Right.
You failed to do something over years. That's what we're seeking to do, to hold those entities responsible.
Okay, so actual knowledge, known or should have known, that's all then...
It's all about negligence.
It's all about negligence. So in order to prove a case or be successful, do those things have to be proven then? That there was actual knowledge that the...
Yes, and this is, it goes back to even the burden of proof, which is the preponderance, is civil, but yes, that has to be shown, that negligence has to be shown through the case.
Negligence does have to be shown, okay. And then you mentioned a couple other states that were doing this, and I do want to just ask, I don't know if there's a technicality in the number of amendments that changed from a single incident or occurrence, then was just changed to an incident or occurrence. What's the change?
So in working with some of the stakeholders, they thought that would provide a little bit more clarity. And that language, again, is borrowed from our Tort Claims Act, which has been for local governments, been on the books since 1987. For local school boards, it's been on the books since 1971. And for the state, it's been on the books since 1980. Thousands of cases have been litigated under these Tort Claims Acts and have worked. Now, I could not, using that language, I couldn't guarantee you an outcome as to whether, under any given scenario, you're going to get one incident, one claim, or if there's, these examples tend to devolve quickly on the floor, so I don't want to go into the details.
That's what I was going to ask next, so I appreciate.
So, large point, it's to provide for more clarity. It's largely taken from the Tort Claims Act, which have been on the books since the 80s. We think that that's the best solution because it's been working through the courts without going into details of specific examples.
And is this type of language similar in the other 3 states that you mentioned that didn't have a look back?
I know that they all have shields of liability, but I'm not familiar with their particular construction of tort claims acts in those other states.
Okay, and then finally, you did mention when you were talking about the other states that have done this, that there was some data as far as the number of cases. Is this goes into effect, or is there some type of reporting that we would see as well too, or would we know in the same way that you found out that data, or is that just third-party data that was made available?
That's third-party data that's made available just from tracking the court cases.
Okay.
Since the passage of the legislation across the nation.
This bill wouldn't require any type of reporting of court cases to know if some of the concerns about, the level of the monetary damages and what was being paid out.
That's correct. This bill does not have a reporting mechanism in it.
We don't have anything with respect to that. Okay, thank you very much.
That's right.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. All right, on the 8 amendments, any further discussion on the amendments? Any objection to the adoption of the amendments? Without objection, the 8 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the amended report. Any discussion? Yes, Chair recognizes Minority Whip on the report. Amendment. All right, on the report, any discussion? If no further discussion, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Chair recognizes the senator from the 42nd District has an amendment. Pages will please collect the senator's, collect and distribute the senator's amendment. And Senator, if you could just give us one moment to get it loaded into the board. All right, Senator may explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. The body will recall my conversation with the floor leader last night. I only have a single amendment, and it relates to the last topic that we discussed last night. So let me read to you the question that I posed to the floor leader to refamiliarize yourselves with what's going on. I said, lastly, let me offer this hypothetical. The owner of all 100 shares of stock in a for-profit child care center founded in 1950, sold his stock in 1970 to a new owner, who in turn sold the stock to a new owner in 1995, and that owner in turn sold the 100 shares of stock in 2020 to the current owner. And my question was, under Senate Bill 686, would it be possible for someone who allegedly experienced sex abuse at the center when he was 6 years old in 1955 to sue the center for $1.5 million, even though the current owner of the center wasn't even born in 1955 and bought the center 3 years ago with absolutely no knowledge that the plaintiff had been abused back in 1955. And the answer of the floor leader last night was yes, that's correct. Someone could sue the center for something that happened decades ago. And what would, in that situation, if a judgment were obtained, it would be against the center, and the person who bought the center in good faith 3 years ago would lose his entire investment because the center or its assets would have to be sold to satisfy the judgment. So this amendment responds to that situation, and it tries to avoid compounding unfortunate situations with unfortunate collateral consequences today. It provides, it is a defense to a claim under this section against any for-profit business entity that the business entity was sold before March 9th, 2023, and is no longer owned directly or indirectly by any person that was an owner of the business at the time that the alleged incident or incidents of sexual abuse giving rise to the claim occurred. So this would let the current owner of the business who bought it in good faith 3 years ago with no knowledge of what allegedly happened back in 1955, it would let him off the hook and prevent him from having his total investment lost through no fault whatsoever of his own. So I recommend the adoption of this amendment.
All right, senators, move the amendment. Let's hear from the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank the senator for the amendment. So this type of successor liability is not a novel question. This happens all the time when deals are done and liability is around and present. And so the courts have dealt with this issue in 1989. It's kind of the seminal case, the Baltimore luggage versus Holtzman, 1989, and they articulate those four exceptions that we talked about yesterday. But more importantly, these are fact-intensive analyses that go on, and the courts have been doing this and do this. This is not a novel problem for mergers, acquisitions, and successor liability. So it's almost we tried to do this. We tried to tackle this issue, and we struggled to find legislative language that would adequately address this. And nothing is more elegant and more appropriate than to leave it to the courts, which have been doing this for years. And so I would ask the body to reject this amendment and leave this type of successor liability question to the courts, which has been done throughout the course of many decades.
All right, question remains on the amendment. Are there any senators who have not yet spoken who wish to speak? If not, we'll hear from the maker of the amendment.
Yes, briefly, Mr. President, let me just say that the language of this statute, the language of the bill is pretty clear. There is no room for a court to say, well, I'm sorry, Mr. Current owner of the business, you're not liable because you didn't know anything about it back in 1955 before you were born, and you bought the business in good faith. The language of the bill does not permit that sort of argument to be made. The court might be very sympathetic to the current owner of the business, but under the bill, there's nothing the court can do. It goes to the jury, and if the jury enters a judgment against the current owner of the business has to pay. And the business will probably have to be sold, or all of its assets will have to be sold to pay off the judgment, and the current owner of the business loses his livelihood. It's wrong. This amendment corrects an injustice. There's no sense in compounding injustice that occurred decades ago with new injustices that occur today. I urge the adoption of the amendment.
All right, on the amendment, any further discussion? Any further discussion? If not, all in favor of the amendment say aye. Opposed, nay. Noes have it. The senator's amendment fails. Any further amendments to the bill or its title? Chair recognizes the minority whip.
Thank you, Mr. President. Do we have an amendment?
Pages will collect and distribute the amendment. All right, Senator, may I explain the amendment?
Thank you, Mr. President. One of the and once again, I'm rising as the senator from District 5. I know it was identified earlier. Just to be clear, this is a discussion I think as a body we're having that's not about ideological persuasion or party. I think all of us 100% want to do something in this regard to deal with this issue and to help people who've experienced it. That to this end, to that end, this amendment would just simply get parity between the public and private sector. This amendment would say if you were sexually abused by a teacher or by a prison guard or in a jail, or if you were sexually assaulted by an agent of the state or government, you shouldn't be entitled to less than if you were assaulted by someone in a private entity. And I know we had the discussion earlier with the chairman about how there's reasons we have sovereign immunity and all of that, but this is a new frontier we're going into, and I think it's dealing with, I'm told it's dealing with a very narrowly tailored thing. I don't know that I agree with that 100%, but I believe it's really important that we have parity between the two. It's not right to say that government only has to pay half a loaf on perpetual systemic sexual abuse. So I would move my amendment, and I would ask for a roll call, Mr. President.
All right, Senator moves the amendment. Chair recognizes the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I echo the sentiments from the senator, because this is not a partisan issue. And I respect the questions and the line of inquiry that's coming from both senators today, because this deals with we have serious constitutional, legal, and fiscal implications. So I appreciate the dialogue. Again, I would ask the body to reject this amendment. It's difficult to even talk about caps at all for this type of exposure to liability for child sex abuse in any realm, in any situation. But the difference, again, between the state and the private entities, the Johns Hopkins Vice, University of Maryland example, I think applies here and is appropriate. And as uncomfortable and difficult it is to discuss caps in general, and then the differentiation between caps, if you're in a public space or a private space, is tough, but is also appropriate. And so I'd ask the body to reject the amendment for all the reasons that I discussed before about sovereign immunity.
All right, on the amendment, any further discussion? Chair, any senators who have not yet spoken wish to speak? If not, Chair recognizes the maker of the amendment.
Just to press the amendment for one more moment. When we've had discussions in this body about other agencies of the state, it's always said we hold a higher burden for those that we give power in the state. And if we are going to be true to our word here, if you have been entrusted by the state with authority over children, whatever line of work we can think of, there's many different occupations that the state empowers folks to deal with children and help children. You took advantage of that, whether it's in teaching or whether it's in policing or Department of Juvenile Services, social work. The list could go on and on. We should be accountable. So I would just press this amendment. This amendment is to have parity, to say that if you were at Johns Hopkins and sexually abused children in the daycare center at Johns Hopkins, or if you were at University of Maryland College Park at the daycare center run by the college and you sexually abused children, then it should be held to the same standard in this specific instance. So that's why I would move the amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, thank you, Senator. On the amendment, any further discussion? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote? Explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 35 votes to the negative, the senator's amendment fails. Senator has another amendment. Pages will collect and distribute the senator's amendment. Senator may explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. There's going to be a lot of talk of lawsuits. There's a lot of talk of lawsuits in this bill, and I actually, my brother is actually a trial attorney in Pennsylvania, so this is not a shot at our friends who advocate for the rights of victims. This is I think, a good faith amendment to say if we're at 1.5 million, for example, of a case, or 890,000 if it's a government case, the money that comes from this really should go as much as possible to the victims. And I can tell you, if this bill passes and is not overruled by the courts, there is going to be a cottage industry in this state. And I don't blame them. Honestly, if I was handling advertising for a firm, if this passes, I would say go out and market, because there are people who legitimately should sue, and there will be a lot of folks. There's going to be a lot of folks that can sue. So this amendment very simply would cap attorneys' fees in an action in this bill at 10%. It's $150,000 for a $1.5 million award, or $89,000 for an $890,000 award. And I think it's actually a good faith amendment to strengthen the bill and will help the bill. I would ask for a roll call on this as well, Mr. President.
All right, Senator moves the amendment. Chair recognizes the floor leader.
Yeah, thanks. The senator is right. I mean, obviously, attorneys will be interested in bringing forth these cases. I've never seen anything as low as 10%. I've just never seen it. And so this bill is about access to justice. You want to make sure that there's a fine balance between, survivors actually being able to get an attorney that's interested in that, in the case, and then also not providing for a perverse incentive so that they have exorbitant fees. So to the trial attorneys out there, if you charge crazy fees, shame on you. But we do want to make sure that everyone has the ability to seek representation. 10% is I've never seen anything that low before. So I'd ask the body to just reject the amendment in the interest of ensuring that survivors have access to counsel.
All right. Any further discussion on the amendment? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 33 votes in the negative, the senator's amendment fails. The senator has another amendment. Pages will collect and distribute the senator's amendment. Senator may explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. This amendment really is designed to try to deal with an issue of fairness. As we've talked about on the floor, the state had sovereign immunity up until 1981. As far as I know, you could not sue the state for anything. And up until 1971, you could not sue a school system or school board. And up until 1987, you could not sue a local government, is what I have in my notes from my research. And then after that, we put into place that you could sue the state, but there were very, very hard caps. And this bill is raising caps, by the way. But what happened was, not only was there a cap, but you had a certain amount of time to get your lawsuit in. I believe it was 3 years in the case of the state. I'm not sure if I think it was 3 for all of those, but it's certainly 3 years in the case of the state. If you waited any longer than that to file a suit, you're out. You could not sue. So folks that sued after these caps were put in place were given, and succeeded, were given awards. The cap for the state after 1980, the cap for locals after 1987 was $200,000, and then it was raised to $500,000 in 2015. So from 1987 to 2015, the most you could sue and get back from a county government was $200,000. And admittedly, $200,000 in 1987 was more money than it is now, but still, that's not a lot of money for someone who maybe suffered a severe trauma or severe difficulty. And for the state, it was $100,000. I'm sorry, for the county boards of elections, it was $100,000 till 2016. It was only $100,000. And for the state, I believe it was similar, and it went up recently. So what my amendment would seek to do would say, if you sued and were successful, but you got that max award, you should be able to apply for this. Because when you introduce retroactivity into something, if this bill was all prospective, this amendment wouldn't make sense. But because we are retroactive, we are saying if you did not sue and you waited and did not file a timely lawsuit, you didn't get anything. If you did what you were supposed to do and filed a suit and got $100,000 or $200,000 in the 1990s or 1980s, you should have waited, because now you could sue for $890. So this bill would just seek to say you can come back and try to get that and try to be given parity for that. So I would move the amendment, Mr. President, and I would ask for a roll call.
All right, Senator moves the amendment. This feels like a civil procedure class on this one.
I know,
think.
this is crazy. So, no, the thrust of the idea is, basically the idea is to say, look, you've got a claim that was final before the new tort claims rose, and then you want to come back and say, on that final judgment, I'm going to basically match my award to what we've done today, to 890, for instance, for the state. Well, in 2003, there was a case called Dua versus Comcast, and it dealt with issues of retroactivity. And the two things that the court was very clear on, the Court of Appeals in the Maryland Supreme Court now was very clear on, is that for accrued claims and for pending claims, you can't do that. Those are barred. What was not addressed is the revival of claims that have been time barred, which is what the issue that this bill presents, which I'm sure will be litigated. So the Supreme Court of Maryland has spoken very clearly on this issue that you cannot do that. It's unconstitutional. Those claims that have already been settled cannot be brought back. And so while the idea may be good, the court has been very clear on the unconstitutionality of this aspect of your amendment. And so for those reasons, if this were to be incorporated, this is kind of a poisonous pill, if you will, I'd ask that the body reject this amendment.
All right. On the amendment, any discussion, any senators who have not yet spoken wish to speak? Chair recognizes the maker of the amendment.
Mr. President, thank you. Just to follow up, and the senator from the chairman of judicial proceedings is a much better expert at the law than I am, because I'm not an attorney. As I look at this, though, we're really delving into an area that already, for years we had the previous attorney general had an opinion that this was not constitutional at all. And actually, in his letter, which I have from 2019, the attorney general said that this bill, which wasn't exactly in this form, but basically this concept, was unconstitutional. I believe, as I read, even without the statute of repose that's had so much attention in previous years. Now, we have a new attorney general who has not said it's constitutional, but has basically said, I'm willing to try to defend it in court. So we're dancing around a lot of things here of constitutional questionability. I would say it would be good to be sure that folks are not barred that simply just filed at the wrong time. We're exploring retroactivity, so I, again, move my amendment.
All right. Let's hear one more time from the floor leader.
Thanks, Mr. President. Only just important because to make sure the legislative record is clear here for the courts, because there are three issues. There are settled claims, like finalized claims. There are pending claims, and then there are time-barred claims. When we're talking about retroactivity, the court through Dua v. Comcast has clear that those pending and those settled claims are unconstitutional to come back and to kind of revive. But the time-barred claims, that issue hasn't been addressed directly on point. So now we can dance around and make inferences of constitutionality on this bill. The court has not directly addressed this specific issue of time-barred claims and retroactivity. So I just want to make sure that it's clear for the record, the legislative record, that there's a distinction that this bill poses.
All right. On the bill, any further discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll. On the amendment, excuse me. On the amendment. Let's call the roll.
Mr. President.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 36 votes in the negative, the senator's amendment fails. Senator has another amendment. Pages will collect and distribute the senator's amendment.
And Mr. President, I'll wait to explain. I do want to say this is the final amendment that I have.
Thank you, Senator.
And I do want to say also that it's an attempt to, again, improve the bill, have some safeguards. So I'll explain it when the time is right, Mr. President.
Senator, explain the amendment.
So this amendment, the last three amendments I've offered have been an issue of access to justice and making sure that we are at parity, or make sure that we maximize the money that survivors would get. That was the previous three amendments talked about. This is taking a little bit of a different approach, but it is an issue I think the body needs to be very cognizant of, because we've also questioned, and the senator from Baltimore County did a much better job than I did of questioning or trying to lay out some of the examples of how this could become a bit of a runaway train if the bill passes. If the bill passes and is not, and the courts do not strike it down. But there's a danger if the courts do strike this bill down, and I think every member of this body needs to be aware of this, that if the court finds this unconstitutional, they will not find the part about the state unconstitutional. They will find only the part that deals with private entities unconstitutional, meaning that if you pass this with this higher cap, which I was okay with trying to make it higher to be at parity, but if it remains, you will have the state on the hook for this. And that could legitimately be as much as the entire blueprint costs us. Just to be clear. And again, if it was all going to be cases where you had to prove actual knowledge and you had to have deeply documented things for this to for someone to win an award, I would not have an issue with it. But as we've established, you may be able to get an award for somebody who has not other than told their story. That's how they remember it. There also could be people who tell a story that isn't correct, but it's going to be very difficult for state, county, and local agencies to produce records from 45, 50 years ago. And again, it's why a statute of limitations generally is important, no matter how frustrating it is in this situation. So my amendment would couple, because the state, by the way, the reason it wouldn't be struck down is because, as I understand it, is the state can give away its rights. We can give away this rights. And perhaps we should establish a policy for this if this bill is struck down. I think it's a fair question to say, should we establish some means for going back to deal with things that dealt with state and local government? But I don't think you want to have this get struck down, but the state is still on the hook for for everything in the bill, when the whole goal was to go after one or two particular bad actors for sure, and perhaps others that are not state entities. The whole goal of this bill may get struck down by the courts. So my amendment just says, let's couple these two together as a safeguard. And I will be, honestly, if this bill gets struck down, I'd be first in line to say, let's put a bill in next year to figure this part out for state and local entities that make sense. But if you don't couple, you can have a situation where the main focus of this bill that everybody hears about in the news, and I don't have a lot of sympathy for that situation. I'm just saying that's the main focus. That could get struck down, but we'll still be on the hook for this. I'd consider this a friendly amendment, Mr. President. I don't know if that's how it'll be received, but I'm not joking. I'm being very sincere. You really want to think about supporting this amendment just as a safeguard. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator.
And I would ask, anyway, let's. Yeah.
All right. Chair recognizes the chair of the committee.
Thanks. The senator makes good points, especially in the respect to, as we discussed, the constitutionality with the private side of the House, the private entities, is an open question, and I think you can make arguments on both sides of the House to, with regard to that. It's very clear that the public side can expose itself to liability retroactively. But what this amendment would say is that, so you've coupled this. So if one side goes unconstitutional, then the public side would do it. So then what you've done then is foreclose the possibility of us going back in a later session and saying, hey, look, the state would like to say, look, as a policy call, we understand there's an injustice here. Let's go give survivors access retroactively. 1. 2, you're saying that even if one door has been closed, that we should close also the other door, the public side of the House. And as policymakers, as a policy call, personally I feel that it's a responsible and just outcome if we were to say, look, absent what happens with the private entities, we as government should say, look, we're going to give those survivors access to justice, no matter what happens on the private entities. So we can still maintain a modicum and a sliver of access to justice even if one door is closed. And what this amendment does is closes the entire operation down and says that we're not going to afford anyone access to justice. So I would ask that the body reject the amendment.
All right. On the amendment, any senators not yet spoken wish to speak? Chair recognizes the maker of the amendment.
May I ask the floor leader to yield?
Will the floor leader yield? Pierce, Senator may proceed.
So I'm not clear why this forestalls the opportunity to come back next year. If this is, let's say hypothetically this is struck down by the courts.
Just because you've made the policy call that we're not going to go back because we're not even going to expose ourselves to this amount of liability retroactively. if the courts have decided on the private side. It's a policy call, not a constitutional or legal issue.
Well, right, but can't we just make a different policy call next year? Because the state can always, I'm sorry, Mr. President, follow up. Can't we make a different policy call next year?
We're making the policy call this year that this amount, $890,000, is the proper amount to be exposed retroactively for the state. And so there's no need to delay on that piece, regardless of what happens on the private entity side of the house. But yes, theoretically, we could come back and do it, but we're doing it now.
Well, we might, but Mr. President, okay, thank you very much. Mr. President, I would suggest that what we may want to do is come back and be sure we've really thought out the ramifications and say, if the court did strike this down, come back and say, may not want unlimited, but we want to be significant. There could be a lot of variations. If it was only going to apply to state and local government, we might take a different tack and find ways to maybe, there could be a lot of different policy decisions if it was not going to apply wholesale to everybody. As you know, I wanted it to be 1.5 million, so in one of my previous amendments. But again, I would urge the body, and I would ask for a roll call, I would urge the body to support this to just as a safeguard. It does not mean you're not for justice for everybody, but we want to be sure that we get the policy right, and so I would move the amendment and ask for a roll call.
All right, Senator moves the amendment. Any further discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote? Explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 33 votes in the negative, the senator's amendment fails. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 686 is hereby ordered printed for third reading. All right, Senators, that was a lot today. Good sense of what the week's going to look like, but the desk is now clear. Won't be clear in a bit, but it's clear at the moment. So let's just go ahead and do committee announcements. Chair recognizes the Chair of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Finance will meet at 1:30 in the hearing room today for bill hearings, followed by a voting session.
All right. Chair recognizes the Chair of Education, Energy, and the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Triple E Committee will meet at 1:30 for bill hearings, followed by a voting session.
All right. Thank you. Chair of Budget and Tax.
Thank you, Mr. President. At 2 o'clock, the Capital Subcommittee will meet, and right after that, probably near 3 o'clock, we'll have a voting, and we will probably go until about 5:30.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chair of Judicial Proceedings.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Judicial Proceedings Committee will meet today at 1:30 for bill hearings. We have 8 bills, 80 witnesses, and then we'll follow that with a voting session.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair of Rules Committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Rules Committee will meet immediately after session in the Red Room.
All right. Rules Committee meeting immediately after session, and immediately means immediately, right, Madam Chair? Chair of the Montgomery County Delegation.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Montgomery County Senate colleagues, we will be meeting between sessions immediately after the first session on Thursday. We've still got a couple of local bills that need to be voted, so immediately following session on Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further caucuses, delegations? Chair of the Veterans Caucus.
Thank you, Mr. President. Veterans Caucus, put it on your calendar now. We have a very important meeting on Thursday. Some very vital information we need to get out. That's Thursday morning, 8:30. I'll repeat that again tomorrow. And if I might, Mr. President, Prince George's delegation tomorrow, 5 p.m. or between sessions. So we'll follow up with you tomorrow. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Any further announcements? If not, let's do a quorum call before we adjourn.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their presence? If so, the clerk will take the call. With 45 members in the chamber and a quorum being present, the Senate of Maryland remains in session. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate of Maryland stand adjourned until Wednesday, March 15th at 10 a.m.
Without objection, so ordered. Have a phenomenal day.